Matthew 12, verse 34. For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Is this a repeat? I thought I had said this earlier in Luke. Yeah, Luke 6:39 to 49. This is part of his Sermon on the Plain. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth that which is good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth that which is evil. Yeah, it's the exact same wording. You know, I'm seriously tempted to fit verses like this in with when he spoke it in Luke, because it is abundantly clear that Matthew does not go through the events and the timing of when Jesus said certain things in order. He does not do that. So whenever I see that something is written in Matthew that was written during a different time in Mark or Luke, I'm really tempted to just move it over to whenever that time was. Like this. I'm also tempted to do that with the Sermon on the Mount, because he begins by saying, "Blessed are the poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you that hunger now." It's worded a little bit differently between Matthew and Luke, but again, Luke is written in order of event and Matthew is clearly not. I'm sure there was a Sermon on the Mount, but it's so long that I am really suspicious that maybe he just included in there a whole bunch of Jesus teachings from other times, because he wanted to get it all out there real fast right at the beginning of the book so that it's very clear what he stands for, what he's all about. I mean, it does fit here because he was just speaking about blasphemy against the Holy Ghost, so then to say, "You will be judged for the words you speak in the day of judgment. By your words you will be justified, by your words you shall be condemned." It makes sense to have that here. I'm really tempted. Mark is written in mostly chronological order. It's very close to Luke. And this speech that he's recording, it just stops right after he's saying, "He that shall blaspheme against the Holy Ghost has never forgiveness, but is in danger of eternal damnation." And he doesn't go on to record the rest of these verses, where he's saying, "Make the tree good and its fruit good. You'll know a tree by its fruit. Generation of vipers. You'll be judged by every idle word." These are not there, but it's pretty close to a different speech here in Luke. So there were a few small changes I made compared to the chronological Gospels. For example, I believe, as I said earlier, that Mary, Jesus' mother, would have told Joseph right away, which means that Joseph, considering putting her away quietly, would have come before Mary went to find Elizabeth. And he put that the other way, that no, she had her dream or her visitation, she went to go see Elizabeth right away, stayed for a few months, and then when she came back, it was found out because he just saw how pregnant she was, and that's when Joseph was going to seek a way to separate her. I can't see that. So anyway, there are some small changes, but this is a big change if I do this. You know what? I'm going to go for it. Yeah. I just can't stand the same words to be repeated in almost exactly the same sentence structure, like a quotation in two different places saying, no, he said those two different times. It may have happened. I understand that ministers and preachers do repeat themselves, but I don't think it's necessary here. It makes sense. When it comes to the Sermon on the Mount, because so much of it, or at least the beginning part where it begins, "Blessed are those, blessed is he," is just like Luke, I think I'm going to move that over to Luke as well for the Sermon on the Plain. And then for the Sermon on the Mount, I will leave whatever is not mentioned elsewhere. And again, I'm doing this because it is abundantly clear that the Apostle Matthew, who wrote the Gospel of Matthew, he wasn't intended to, he didn't care too much about putting things in order. Just look at what happened after the Sermon on the Mount. Chapter 8. After he comes down from the mountain, he heals a leper. And then he goes to Capernaum and he heals the centurion's servant. And then it goes into healing Peter's mother. And he casts out many devils, heals all that were sick, fulfills prophecy. It's like he's writing all these things up until this mention of the fact that he's fulfilling prophecy, just to prove that he's fulfilling prophecy. Not to say this is when that happened and that's when that happened over there. He's hitting highlights. He's saying he did that and that and that. Doesn't matter if they were months separated, just to lay out the case that he's fulfilling prophecy. After this, he saw the great multitudes. It says he departed to the other side. A scribe came to him, and now he's explaining this is what Jesus' ministry is like. He's not comfortable all the time. Someone else came to him and said, let me go bury my father. And he said, well, let the dead bury the dead. He's further explaining what his ministry is like. It's not comfortable. Then he calmed the storm. Then he cast out the demons from those 2 demoniacs, sent the demons into the swine. These are massively out of order, but he's hitting highlights, which means that these 5, 6, and 7, these 3 chapters of his Sermon on the Mount, this is like the longest speech he ever gave, period. I had another thought another time that in almost all of his other speeches, when he's explaining and teaching and preaching to the crowd, the record of him speaking, of giving a lesson, is very short. He's giving a parable, and it's full of really deep and rich meaning, and it's got so much context to it. And if you know of the scenario going on and the politics and the situation people are living in, it's got so much detail. But it's not long. He's a master of getting a lot of information across in a very short time. But that makes the Sermon on the Mount super long, and it stands out. It stands out. It's different from the baseline of Jesus' ways of teaching people and speaking to crowds. And there may be times where he is speaking for a longer period of time, but it's usually not like that. So again, that along with the fact that it's such a close repeat to what's written in Luke, which is at a different time, I'm going to move that. I'm going to move these verses, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are they that mourn, blessed are the meek. I'm going to move that over to the Sermon on the Plain. And there's a whole bunch in here. So I'm not going to just eviscerate this speech, the Sermon on the Mount, and just whittle it down. But whatever is repeated, I will move it to the other place with the intent of saying when he said certain things and when he did certain things. Because I just can't trust Matthew in regards to the timeline. I'm going to mix those verses from the Sermon on the Mount that are almost exactly the same. It's not everything, it's like a chunk here and there and there. The very beginning, the very end, a few places in the middle, and then I'll cut those out from the Sermon on the Mount, and then I'll get back to where I was at. The only real objection I can think of for doing that is that readers who have been reading the Bible for a long time would not like it because it's contrary to what they're accustomed to. It's different from what they might have memorized, saying the Sermon on the Mount always begins, blessed are the poor, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness' sake. But this entire work is kind of against tradition and just going by the facts and by what can be seen from the Gospels to put it in order. So I'm okay with bucking tradition. I'm okay with people rejecting this because it's not what they like. And it would make the Sermon on the Mount a lot easier to memorize because it's a bit shorter, and the Sermon on the Plain is a bit longer, or it'll be just a little bit longer because there are repeats. It's not added stuff. I'm just putting what's pretty much the exact same. So I'm just getting rid of repetition, which was one of the whole points in the first place. I'm tired of the repetition.